Should Rick Barnes target a player like Edey in the transfer portal? Would you like me to make my case first or ask you, Caleb?
I have my thoughts already, so go ahead and make your case because I want to see
Okay.
if you can change my mind.
My case is that Edey and those types of players, back to the basket players, still have a home in college basketball. There are two big men in the Final Four that have advanced. So while I don't think there's room literally in the paint for a big guy like Shaq or Chamberlain, I think they would have to be athletic and have to be able to get outside a little bit. I think they'd be different. Don't get me wrong. They're great athletes. They'd be very, very good. But I think in college basketball, you can still do the down low, dump it like Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, whoever you want to pick. I picked a couple of Celtics, but those post moves are still doable at the college level. Also, I know a lot of you are upset about Zach Edey camping out in the lane. If you go back and watch some of the videos, because Caleb pointed this out to me, that you just have to get 1 foot outside of the lane to be considered out of the lane for the 3-second call. I've seen some video that a lot of fans are pointing to as this is proof he was in the lane. He was actually like a ballet dancer. He was taking his right foot, getting outside, then he'd pivot over to try to shift over to the other block, get his left foot outside. And if you really watch his footwork, it's hard not to have some real appreciation for the guy. So I think you can still do that. I think it fits Barnes in particular because players can play a tough defensive style for him, a la kind of a boring style at times. I think they would do that for him. Also, I still think you can get out and run because I'm talking about one big man. I'm not talking about putting together the front court of the 80s Boston Celtics with McHale, Bird, and Parrish. I'm just talking about one big guy. So am I crazy or am I on the mark that a Zach Edey that you could dump it down to and get a deuce is the way to go? I may be being a traditionalist, Caleb, because I like in a lot of sports tradition, I like defense. So I could be way off base here. I'm curious what some of our listeners think on the message board as well, Caleb.
Well, I'm not against going down, playing in the paint to win. I've said this for a while. There's a market. There's going to be an NBA team, Dave, that gets two bigs and plays an inside-out game, and they're going to be very good because no team is constructed to go against them.
Totally agree. I think you could be way ahead of the curve.
Yeah, exactly. And so, again, I bring it up, but like, guys, in the 2010s, when floor spacing became common in the NBA, I'm a Grizzly fan. The Grizzlies, what did they do? They had Marc Gasol and Zach Randolph. And they were just like, we're going to pound it down low every single time. And they almost got to the finals doing that. And if they had a score, they would have gotten to the finals. So I'm not against the concept. But Dave, I got to be honest with you. There's not a lot of Zach Edeys out there in the transfer portal. I think that's where it's different. Zach Edey's not your run-of-the-mill big guy. One, he's 285 pounds. Also, if you notice, and this is what caught me off guard with him, that's different about Zach Edey this year than last year when Purdue got sent home early. Zach Edey is able to play a little bit away from the basket defensively now, which he wasn't able to do last year. And on top of that, he's actually not far, but he plays. He can.
I think you're being overly kind, to be real honest.
He was better than last year. I will just say that when Purdue got eliminated, he's also a more effective.
I've got a puppy who would be better than he was last year away from the basket.
Okay. He's also a much more effective passer now from underneath the basket, which you don't get a lot of that in a lot of big men. Now, I think there's certain parts to Zach Edey's game that are just rare on their own. And because of that, I don't think I think Rick Barnes needs to go for exactly what he went for this past year in the transfer portal. Go for the next Dalton Knecht. Now, I know that's not easy to say. You can't just say go for the next Dalton Knecht. But I do think you find a veteran that's a scorer that needs to improve a part of their game that would fit perfectly with Rick Barnes. Because, Dave, going for a Zach Edey, that's like saying go for a Cam Newton at the junior college level in college football.
Well, no, but I'm not saying you're going to get another Edey, but that direction, I believe there is room for that. And I think we all saw how tough that was to defend for Tennessee. And doesn't it give Rick Barnes kind of a natural sort of out as a way to win the NCAA tournament. He can always drop it down low and say, well, shots just didn't fall. I lost another NCAA tournament game. I mean, that to me makes a lot of sense. And you pointed out that, and your column still online, is that Rick Barnes is poised to be incredible because he showed that he was willing to change at 69 years old. I agree with that. This would require a vast change of saying, hey, we're going to walk it up. We're going to dump it down low and see what happens. Do you think he would be willing to do that? Is maybe even a tougher question.
No, because I don't think he should. Because I think this only works because of a player like Edey. And by the way, Dave, let's be clear. Purdue's not the favorite to win the Final Four. UConn is. And UConn's an overwhelming favorite to win the Final Four.
Yeah,
and
but nobody's going to. Yeah, but I think you would agree nobody would complain if Tennessee had an Edey type and they were in the Final Four and they were still long shots to win the whole thing, right?
No, they wouldn't. But the problem itself wasn't that Tennessee didn't have an Edey in that game. The problem was that Jonas Aidoo was incredibly soft. And I mean, that's and I think next year, by the way, you talk Barnes projects development, maybe he already has his Edey, because I'm just going to say he's not Edey, but you saw how JP Estrella physically played Edey in the second half of that game, right? I mean, he played him, he forced him left a few times and Edey got much less efficient. You can play Edey right. There's just not a lot of people that do it. Wisconsin did beat Purdue in overtime because they played him tough under the basket in the Big Ten tournament. I just don't think Tennessee's starting center, unfortunately for them, was just far too soft to be able to do anything, to the point to where Josiah Jordan-James, who was 5 inches shorter than Aidoo, waved him off the block on a free throw, and he said, let me get underneath because I'll get the rebound and you can't. That's embarrassing for Aidoo. I mean, I'm not trying to hate on Aidoo that much more, but he's really, really soft right now.
I think, soft or not, he talked himself out of that game before that game ever began. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, he saw, and Smoky Mountain Red's referencing this in some shape, form, or fashion. Yeah, Edey he did exactly that. Maybe that's where I got it from subconsciously in Aidoo's head. Before it even started, that Aidoo watched him on film, was like, I don't want any dad blame part of this.
That's exactly what happened. I mean, again, I always go back to the Blake Griffin story. Blake Griffin was the clear-cut #1 pick in the 2010 NBA draft, and the book out on him was a bunch of scouts from the Big 12 were saying, you don't really want this guy. If you cheap shot him under the basket, he backs down. He doesn't want to get physical. 10 years later, Dave, who would you have rather had as a player for your career for a period of time? Draymond Green or Blake Griffin? I'm thinking Draymond, because, whatever you think of Draymond, he'll win the fights under the basket, right? Like, you think Draymond would have let Zach Edey punk him like that?
No, but no, I don't. But two different players. I want to ask you this because it was brought up by Crystal on our message board. Does Tennessee need to get stronger in the post, regardless of what happened just with Edey? I remind you that we're represented by Banks and Jones. So, Caleb, does Tennessee need to get stronger in the post? Is that a mission statement, a movement from this point forward? Banks and Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks and Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks and Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks and Jones. T. Scott Jones. BanksandJones.com. So did Tennessee just get punked by Edey, or ultimately do they need to get better in the post? Is that an underlying issue with this team and ultimately the way Rick Barnes recruits from year to year?
No, they just got punked by Edey because their star big man was soft, and their backup, the tough one, Toby Awaka, who is it's almost the opposite problem. He's not finesse enough. He's so aggressive that he picks up too many fouls.
I never say this about any athlete. He needs to stay out of the weight room. He's big enough.
I agree.
I mean, there's no fluidity to his movement. It's just like, I'm like, dude, that's enough. That's enough shrugs. You need to just work on your jump shot a little bit more, because If that guy had an offensive game, he left it behind when he came to Tennessee.
Oh, I agree. And he it's kind of, well, he comes from that. You got, I mean, you know, he and Zakai actually both came from that New York AAU circuit. And by the way, for those who don't know, the AAU circuit in New York, they're scouted at Rucker Park or playing on the, you know, playing on the courts in the parks in New York City. And as you know, Dave, and up there, there's no rules on those in that type of basketball, none whatsoever. I mean, you take a beating on the court if you know, on the park in New York City. So I think so that's where it comes from. I do think that, so I don't think, I just think Jonas Edey needs to get tougher. Owaka needs to get more finesse, and Estrella just needs to develop. I mean, Estrella played Edey very well, honestly. And I think Edey was very dominant through the later part of the first half and early in the second half. But Dave, the last like 8 minutes of the game, Edey wasn't like unstoppable. Remember, Tennessee got back in that game multiple times.
I thought he was probably fatigued at that size, getting
yeah.
up and down the court. It's not like it was a frantic pace, but probably faster than what he's used to. I wouldn't have a problem with Tennessee going with a post player. As a matter of fact, I would like it. Maybe Estrella's that guy. But if I'm Estrella, I'm looking at Edey and I'm thinking that's what I want to be. That's exactly what I want to be.